Folks, my name is Damien Willie, better known as Cornish Damo, and welcome to another Damo Meets. This week we've been covering the theme of health on Socialist Telly, particularly in relation to the recent budget and the ongoing COVID crisis. As has happened so often in recent years, the last 10 under Conservative rule certainly, the long-term sick and disabled have gone largely ignored, but in particular those who are still in the legacy benefit system and their carers, for whom no additional support has been offered throughout the COVID period of the last year, and nor in Rishi Sunak's recent budget. And to discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined by two representatives from Disabled People Against Cuts, DPAC, Jen and Paula. Welcome to you both. I'm delighted to be speaking to you tonight. And another welcome to my excellent co-host from last week, the pride of Rotherham, Sarah Grant. Hello, folks.
Hello,
how are you?
Damo. Hello.
Hi.
Now, the Conservatives would have us believe that legacy benefit recipients, those of people who are still in the old benefit system, to people unfamiliar with the term, the vast proportion of whom are on long-term sickness or disability benefits these days, apparently do not need additional support because it's a generous benefit already, but we know this isn't true. And it has angered me no end when I see this claim made. Throughout this COVID crisis, unlike the universal credit claimants, there has been no uplift. The hashtag 20 more for all has been circulating, calling for the additional £20 uplift to be extended to legacy benefit claimants too. Could you give us some idea of the additional needs legacy benefit claimants have faced that they've had no extra support to cover, that DPAC has heard of and been working with? Who would like to come in on that first?
Jen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, it varies from household to household, and whether somebody's got live-in carer, a familial carer, or pays for their care. There's a lot of different strands to this problem. To give you one example, before the pandemic, if somebody had just had their work capability assessment and been turned down, they then would be on the very basic ESA, if they're already on ESA, with no severe disability premium, etc. Withdrawal of the PIP would then mean they then wouldn't be able to maybe pay for their carer. Okay, so that means then when they get a letter from the council or the DWP or travel companies, local travel authority, when they have to tick a box saying, do you pay for anyone to care for you, they've then got to tick no because their support's been taken away, right? Which means then services like having your wheelie bins taken out for you, having your mobility travel pass and other sorts of services that people can access when they've been awarded their PIP or their severe disability premium, that then are taken away. And the warm home discount for your utilities bills is one of those as well. So this is a culmination of a lot of problems that a lot of people have faced during the lockdown, whether they're waiting for a work capability assessment or they've just had it and they've been put in that situation. On another hand, then you've got people who are on the ESA, the old style legacy benefits, and also job seekers allowance and income support as well in some cases, but we're talking about disabled people today. So Disabled People Against Cuts did a survey a couple of weeks ago, just before the budget, and we know that a lot of the media and MPs and councillors and so on were talking about how does this £20 a week benefit people, and we were hearing a lot from people on universal credit how that £20 a week benefits them. So we did a sort of an opposite survey by saying, if you had the £20 a week uplift on your legacy benefits, what would you use it for? How do you feel that you could benefit from it? And the answers that we got were, again, sort of like the opposite tally to what you'd see people were saying who were on the universal credit. So people who were on the universal credit would say, I've been able to keep my heating on, I've been able to pay for taxis if I've needed to get to appointments, so on and so forth. Whereas the people on legacy benefits would say, I'm cold, I've not been able to keep the heating on, I can't wash my clothes as often as I need to, I can't wash myself as often as I need to, I can't pay for extra care, I can't pay for incontinence pads. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, Damon.
Yeah. Paula, do you want to add to any of that?
Yeah, I think, going to incontinence pads, the NHS only provide 4 incontinence pads for a month. And, many disabled people with, bowel and bladder problems need to change several times a day. And, you know, we've had stories, you know, with people on ESA and PIP who said, you know, the £20 uplift would mean to them, you know, being able to buy more incontinence pads because they're using sanitary pads which are leaking and, you know, causing them further distress and discomfort. And that's one of the problems. Obviously, you know, with mental health cuts and everything, long-term therapy is not available on the NHS either. You only get 6 sessions of CBT, improving access to psychological therapists. For a lot of people, including myself, who need ongoing therapy. I lost my mental health support during the pandemic 2 days after my aunt died of coronavirus, and then a month later I was violently attacked and diagnosed with PTSD, and treatment's ongoing. I've had to find a low-cost therapist, which is £10 a session, which is having to come out of my legacy benefits to pay for treatment because that treatment's not available on the NHS. And we had a disabled person only in the last week on our Facebook page who's just been told that they can't have podiatry treatment on the NHS. They now have to pay for it. So you're getting things where you've got to pay for hearing aids, which, you know, you're having to pay for therapy, you're having to pay for treatment. That funding is slowly being withdrawn from the NHS. And obviously within Rishi Sunak's budget on the 4th of March, there was a 30 billion hidden cut to NHS funding, and they've only just said recently, medics have actually said that, you know, it's going to be towards disabled people where this cut's really going to have an impact, and that means it's going to be withdrawal of treatment. And obviously during the pandemic, we've seen disabled people waiting months and months for treatment, being denied treatment, not having access to consultants, having feeding tubes have not been changed, or saying, you know, you can't have the proper equipment because we need this for ventilators and everything like that. So, and obviously the cost of food is going absolutely through the roof, and Brexit has really pushed that up. You know, the costs have risen over 20%. Online delivery costs have risen, and during the last lockdown before Christmas, supermarkets increased their charges between £2 and £4, which you're making those stark choices between heating and eating. You know, wearing a blanket because you can't afford to put the heating on, going, I mean, we've had stories of, you know, having to only eat 1 meal a day because disabled people having to pay for personal protective equipment for their carers, and those costs have had to be found, and there hasn't been the support for that, you know. And we've had an awful lot of, you know, a lot of disabled people haven't been able to get the online delivery slots needed, especially during the first lockdown. And a lot of disabled people have been, you know, going hungry, relying on cup of soups. And I think another story we got, you know, someone said the £20 uplift would mean that they could put credit on their phone because they haven't been able to talk to anyone for months and been isolated. It's stark reality stories like that that show what disabled people on legacy benefits are going through every single day. And I think what the travesty has been during the campaign is the lack of media attention this has gotten, because this is our everyday lives that we're experiencing here, you know.
Can I just pick up from that briefly off the back of what Paul has just said, is that when we look at the replies to the survey that we've got, and we've got nearly 200 replies, and over 80% of the people who replied were legacy claimants, as a lot of our members are. But what got me, and actually, you know, really got me in tears, to be perfectly honest with you, was the similarity between the answers that those people were given and what I've experienced during the lockdown, and what a lot of other of our members that I know personally have experienced during the lockdown. But that overwhelming, almost suffocating feeling of isolation, and feeling that you're a burden. Feeling that you're a burden on your family, feeling that you're a burden on your local community, and feeling that you're a burden on society and the health service, and so on and so forth. And it's like, what we needed was those caring hands to be wrapped around us, and our disabled community were left out in the cold, quite literally. I mean, I know people over this winter who've been going to bed completely fully clothed, with a duvet, with a sleeping bag, still being cold. We've had a very cold winter. And when you're disabled already, and you've got problems already that are going to only be exacerbated by being subject to extreme temperatures and malnutrition and so on and so forth, that's then a vicious cycle of you then needing the NHS more and needing more support from health services. Doesn't it make sense to support our disabled community?
Well, this is it. This is it. I mean, you've raised some perfectly salient points regarding the media, especially here, that ignore this issue repeatedly. I think a lot of the reason that the media ignore it is because there is no real way for disabled people to challenge what is happening to them. There's no leverage because they are very much at the whim of the government of the day and what they want to do. And the money that legacy claimants get, let's talk about the legacy claimants firstly for a moment here. These are the people that universal credit, when that system came in, couldn't really cope with because they had very complex additional needs, very varying levels of funding, because they get this additional money for being, by virtue of the fact that they are disabled or they are long-term sick. And the system that the Tories concocted has never worked properly, and certainly doesn't work for disabled people particularly. So most of the people that are on ESA and those disabled, which is the main sickness benefit that is still a legacy benefit that's still in existence, most of the people that are still on that are chiefly the most ill, most disabled people out there. And they've offered no additional funding for these people whatsoever from the very get-go. And let's remember that the level of funding of benefits that the government deems appropriate for any claimant is supposed to be, in their view, the bare minimum to be able to get by on. Now, we know they froze a lot of these benefits for years, a few years back, in the name of austerity. And there's never been any real uplift to bring those benefits back into line. So disabled people have been struggling to get by in normal circumstances for quite some time. With the whole COVID pandemic as well, and obviously the effects of Brexit, you've got rising costs across the board. I think it's absolutely disgusting that supermarkets have raised their delivery slot prices because far more people are having to rely on them. If disabled people or long-term sick people are having to shield, they have no choice but to use these slots, and they're hard to get hold of. And effectively, supermarkets are banking off the back of those that have no choice but to use that service right now. I mean, it's appalling. And I know some of the stories that you've spoken about with regards to this survey that was done, this £20 uplift, and how people would use it. Simple things like being able to put their heating on. I mean, heating has been a scandal for a long, long time now, but it's worse now than it ever was before. And the rising costs of medication, certain treatments that should be available on the NHS, they're not. And again, this comes into that whole side of things.
Can I feed into that?
Sarah in first a moment. I'll come back to you, Paula.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to obviously the effect of this kind of move to UC on disabled claimants. I read something the other day about the Disability News Service being branded vexatious by the DWP because they've been trying to put in a Freedom of Information Act to find out what their analysis is with regards to the not only the effect of what this move to UC is going to be on people, but how many people are actually going to lose out when this happens. I mean, the DWP admits that they've done an analysis on people that are going to gain, but they don't seem to have been. This analysis doesn't seem to have been done on how many people are actually going to lose out, and the fact that they're actually blocking Disability News Service from getting this information. What's your views on that?
It's typical DWP game playing, really. If you look throughout the austerity agenda, the DWP have always tried to block reports. You look at benefit deaths with with Errol Graham with the WCA and Philippa Day with PIP, trying to get the truth of the impact of the horrendous disability assessments and the DWP blocking the duty of care that they have. And to be honest with you, they do have a duty of care to treat disabled people with respect and everything. And it's been an absolutely horrendous impact on disabled people's lives, and their constant fear and worry of losing what little support you have. You live with the black cloud of the DWP hanging over your head day in, day out, never knowing when the next review is going to happen. And for changing the brown envelopes to white, well, ESA reviews come in white envelopes, so it's not going to dampen down fear. That was their response to, you know, Philip Day, you know, coroner's request, and how they're going to change the processes. You need to overhaul the complete system. We need a fair and just social security system. This is an absolutely pernicious and evil system. What the government have done is created a two-tier system, where if you saw the Martin Lewis interview of Rishi Sunak, when he said about the £20 uplift, that he actually stated that was for low income workers. There was no mention of disabled people on that. He wants people to go onto universal credit. You know, he's not going to, we've still got to fight for the £20 uplift, because this government do not want us to have it, because they want everybody working. That is their agenda right there. They don't want anyone not to be working. They want everyone working. But their overall agenda is, and with the whole way through the thread of austerity and even through the pandemic, is to remove the duty of care by the state, not just at national level, but local level as well. They want to get rid of the welfare state and the NHS, replace it with privatisation and a healthcare insurance. And what they would really love to do is bring in a sickness insurance, so you save while you're working. So when you're off sick, you replace, you know, you live off the savings from that insurance. That is where they're heading towards. And for many of us who are unable to work and everything, that's going to leave us with nothing. That is what they want.
Jen, do you want to come in on Sarah's question?
Yeah, with regard specifically to two things that you asked there, Sarah. One is about how easy or difficult it is to get accurate, truthful information from the Department of Work and Pensions, and how forthcoming they've been with parting with information in the past. And also, secondly, how disabled people potentially can lose out from the move to legacy benefits to universal credit. I mean, just briefly with universal credit, we know there's a 5-week wait. We know there's a risk to people losing the severe disability premium, and so on and so forth. How many children do you have? When were they born? If you've got them. If you're a disabled parent and you are currently receiving severe disability premium and caring for your disabled child, right? And when you go onto universal credit, you will lose your severe disability premium, because there's nothing set up in the way that universal credit is paid out that means that they even conceive of the fact that a disabled parent who cares for their own disabled child can exist. It's almost like we're not allowed to be parents at all. And heaven forbid that our children have any disabilities, because that severe disability premium is gone. If you're going to continue to be in that caring role for your child, you can't claim both elements at once. And that's cruel. It's cruel to the parents. It particularly will affect single parents. It particularly will affect women. And it's deeply cruel to the children, who are already suffering under so many things. We know about the free school meals, deathcare, and so on and so forth. When it comes to the DWP parting with information, I mean, these, you can see there are these stickers behind me were from Dump Metro DWP Lies campaign, which was a national DPAC campaign a couple of years ago, where we had information leaked to us, an internal memo from the DWP, that they were going to try and boost the image of universal credit publicly, and that they were going to be putting advertorials in the Metro newspaper, which also appeared on the Daily Mail website, by the way, using public money, but there would be no DWP branding on it anywhere. This was little mythbusters, they called it, myth busting, and the facts about universal credit, how great universal credit is. I mean, the various charities challenged what were in these advertorials, and the PCS did as well, saying, well, actually, no, that's not accurate. It did say in tiny weeny letters across the top of the page, this is an advertorial from the Department of Work and Pensions. If you used a magnifying glass, you could just about make it out. But they used somewhere in the region of £250,000 of public money just for the printed version of those adverts alone. And it took journalist Aditya Chakrabarti a lot of hard work, which we're very grateful for, to get that information. But as you say, he faced the same challenges that Disability News Service are facing now. People are absolutely made to jump through hoops. And, you know, we've got freedom of information laws in this country for a reason. These things should be publicly accessible, especially when it's involving the public purse. Why are they not forthcoming? There is an easy answer, and the easy answer is for them to go, here are the figures, or here's our analysis. That's the easy answer. When people aren't forthcoming with that sort of information, then you've got to stop and you've got to question why. And the answer inevitably with the Department of Work and Pensions is that they're hiding something and that it's costing all of us, allegedly.
Paula, you wanted to come back in?
I think when we've been outside job centres, when we've gathered survey information, especially for Unite Community, because Jen and I are also Unite Community activists as well, and we've spoken to claimants, many of whom are disabled claimants who are claiming universal credit. Many have had to rely on friends and family to pay their rent with the 5-week wait, you know, having to sell their possessions to put food on the table. It's put women, you know, driven women into prostitution to literally put food on their table. And, you know, you're seeing, you know, the high rate of sanctions with universal credit and the work coach. And let's be clear on this point, work coaches have got 3 weeks training to be a work coach. And they've, DWP have gone on a recruitment drive to recruit 10,000 work coaches, especially during the pandemic. But what we also don't talk enough about is universal credit is a digital system. And, you know, many disabled claimants need help from friends and family to complete the application for universal credit. And if you make a mistake, you're logged out and then your claim stops, and that's causing further distress. And with many, and, you know, since 2010, we've had 810 libraries, and Huffington Post did a Freedom of Information request. 810 libraries have closed, and there's been 32,000 computers removed out of libraries. Yeah. And many disabled people, you know, you've got a third of disabled people in the UK out of 14 million who have no access to a computer, or their access needs met to use one. And, you know, libraries provide a vital service, and you're finding the library workers that are still in the libraries are now becoming welfare advice officers as well, because obviously welfare advice centres are closing, so they're providing help with applications, and everything's going online. Access to the NHS, access to benefit system, access to the court system to get justice, everything is going online, and that's marginalising disabled people still further. I mean, a friend of mine, she hasn't got a smartphone, and she has a laptop, but she's unable to use it because she hasn't got the skills to use one. And for her to apply for universal credit is going to be an absolute nightmare for her, and that's going to further increase her mental distress. And I think as the managed migration begins, you know, at the end of this year, we're going to see more and more disabled people struggle to access the digital system. And I mean, the DWP only released in the last several days the digital version of the UC50 for the work capability assessment for universal credit, the digital system. That's going to exclude a great many disabled people from able to fill that out and complete it, and that's going to mean that they lose their support, you know. And our overall, you know, even though we're campaigning for £20 more for all, we still, you know, the campaign for stopping and scrapping universal credit and replacing it with a fair and just social security system continues, because universal credit is absolutely showing a rise in homelessness, a rise in poverty, the destitution and the dreadful distress it's causing. And it was designed to do that. It was designed to throw people off the support they're entitled to. And it's important that we get wider support around the campaign around universal credit, because, you know, and what the wider public need to see is a great many people on universal credit are in work. And in my borough, which is Bromley, during the pandemic, they had a 182 increase in claims for universal credit because of job losses. You're seeing 6.5 million people now on universal credit who are, you know, and when the £20 uplift comes to an end in October, beginning of October, the furlough scheme ends, you're going to see unprecedented rises of homelessness and destitution.
Yeah, and the associated issue with an awful lot of the ramifications that you've just listed has been mental health crises and the growing issue of mental health. Many of the extra costs faced by all disabled people, actually, be they on universal credit now or still on the legacy system, are down to cuts in local services, like you've mentioned. Certain medical services that are no longer available via the NHS. Libraries are a huge issue, as you've just outlined. And getting adaptations has become so hard that people have been crowdfunding for wheelchairs and the like due to cuts to occupational therapy and the difficulty in getting GP assessments. Instead of funding these services properly, the criteria ends up being changed. So fewer people qualify. And this has been one of the underlying, murky issues surrounding universal credit. It's an unending race to the bottom for disability services in Britain today. And people don't want these things for the fun of it. They need them, and not being able to access them is going to make their health worse. And it's particularly going to have an impact on mental health, isn't it?
Jen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that brings us back partly to the point of being so isolated, and that how a variety of adaptations and care services actually can improve people's access to being part of their community, seeing family members or being part of society. Obviously where appropriate within the pandemic, but outside of pandemic times, this has been an issue for a long time. And something that has really saddened me lately, particularly in the city that I live in Sheffield, is that we're seeing an increase of people who have mobility aid having them stolen. And the heartbreaking reason behind that we're seeing these things being stolen is not always because people are taking those things because they think they can sell them and get a lot of money for them. It's because there'll be someone who needs it, and they'll be taking it for their own nan, for their own grandpa, or for a member of their family. Now that doesn't excuse it, but let's look at the whole situation here. If people had access to the adaptations that they should have a right to in order to be able to be included in the community that they live in and go see their family and friends whenever they want to, then people wouldn't be stealing from each other. And it's just so sad. Imagine stealing a mobility scooter from somebody who's already got nothing, so you can pass it on to somebody who's got nothing. I mean, for goodness sake, it's just a nasty, vicious circle. And then, of course, once you're isolated because things have been taken, then you are back to square one, aren't you? And again, you see people having to crowdfund. There was a gentleman recently, a war veteran actually in Sheffield, who had his mobility scooter taken. And we did support the fundraiser to be able to replace that. And I'm pleased to say that the community pulled together and that it was replaced for him, bless him. But it shouldn't be up to the community to put donations in a pot. The government should be making sure people have a right to access things that they really need. And they don't.
I mean, since 2010, you've seen we've seen dreadful cuts to the social care budget of, over 8 billion's been wiped off social care. And then when you see the cuts to local authority budgets for the councils, they've seen a 76% decrease in funding for their budgets. And you're now seeing local authorities charge disabled people for social care. We've had stories of disabled people paying £100 for their social care costs, which any benefit they would have got from PIP is being completely wiped out because they're paying for social care costs. And DPAC has a campaign at the moment to write to all the directors of the 51 local authorities about social care costs. But the criteria for, wheelchairs has changed. Even for, our neighbour here, she's 100 years old, actually. She's in hospital at the moment. During the pandemic, she's been in hospital 7 times. And she has carers come in 3 times a day, and probably for 5 minutes. And the poor lady's having falls and everything next door. And she was told because it's sheltered accommodation, she was told by the Life Smart manager and by Bromley Social Care, she doesn't meet the criteria for nursing care. So she's in and out of hospital, and we can't go in and see her because obviously we're shielding and everything, and and it's heartbreaking because you can hear that the buzz are going, and obviously you're paying £20 for the CareLink system here. And when our neighbour the other side fell just shortly before lockdown began, that care buzzer went for over an hour before somebody answered. I had to go in and pick the poor lady up off the floor. She could not get up off the floor. And you've got 1.5 million older disabled people who are getting inadequate care in the community because the care charges are absolutely horrendous and people can't afford them because you are financially assessed for these care charges. And it's also with the Independent Living Fund, when that finally closed in 2015. Over 50% of ex-ILF users have had their care packages cut, and that is a difference of them living independently in the community. And I think it's really important to stress here that the right for disabled people to live independently in the community is not enshrined into UK law. What we're actually seeing here is the government just want to make sure we do not live independently in the community. And as Jen's pointed out, to them we're expendable, and you're seeing this with the shadow of eugenics, and with the coronavirus bill and the do not resuscitate placed on thousands of disabled people's records, especially those with learning impairments as well. I think that's really important to stress, without their consent and without families' consent. That's causing horrendous distress right now. It really, really is. It's sad. Like I said before, the duty of care is being withdrawn not only by national level, local level as well.
Sarah?
It's haves and have-nots.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's just another example that of the government not doing its, doing its what its duty is to look after the people of the country, and you see that with the food, with the food poverty, and you're seeing it with this as well. Going back to local authorities, obviously, if you're in social housing, then obviously the ability to get adaptations is a lot easier rather than if you're in private or own your own property. What would you like to number one, what do you think will happen in the future when it comes to social housing? Will adaptations based on the fact that social housing is now allocated on more of a need rather than want basis, particularly ground floor properties?
I just disagree with your statement there, because this is social housing.
Yeah.
Right, we had a 95-year-old resident who couldn't get a walk-in shower. She was strip washing for 2 years because the housing authority refused to put in a walk-in shower.
What was the reason for that?
They, funding and money and everything like that. And I'm going to expose them. It's Clarion Housing Association, which is one of the biggest housing associations in the UK.
Wow.
There was another occasion where a disabled person, their front door entry system was locked, and they had to call the fire brigade, put a call out on Twitter, and their PAs could not get into the building, right, which puts their safety at risk. If there was a fire in that flat, they could have been at serious risk. But we are seeing more and more often that housing authorities are actually not meeting the duty of care. I mean, like I said, this is all sheltered accommodation here, and they're not putting in the adaptations that are needed. They really are not.
I think especially kind of housing, you're in a housing association property. I think the problem with a lot of housing associations, what I'm finding is that they're being allowed to be run for profit.
Yeah.
And that's my principal problem with housing associations. Obviously, like local authority social housing, obviously isn't run for profit, and I would love all social housing to be brought totally within local authority purview, basically, because that's my main problem. And that case with the 95-year-old tenant, is a perfect example as to why housing associations should not be run for profit, because once profit comes into it, then the service that they provide is lost and the core focus and purpose is lost.
We need more social housing built, but when you see housing, you see housing built, they probably put like 3 affordable like units within, which is unaffordable for locals to actually rent or even, get access to.
Yeah.
And for disabled people to access accessible housing is a complete nightmare. We've got many disabled people who are, you look at Grenfell, for example, there were disabled people that died at Grenfell that were put on, a high-rise tower block, on 17th floor and above, and couldn't get out of the building,
Yeah.
And, there are many disabled people in that situation who are in completely inaccessible housing with no way of getting the adaptations they need to be able to live independently, and having a complete battle with, their landlord and housing association to get anything done about it. I mean, my partner's mum was told when the shower was leaking, she was told it wasn't the duty of the housing association to deal with the shower base and the shower. And you're getting things like this. And she turned around and said, well, I'm on housing benefit, I'm a pensioner, and I'm on council tax benefit. I can't afford to do this. I can't afford to, do these adaptations and everything myself. I need support to do that. And it's the callous attitude sometimes of where you go for support on the end of the line, you need that support and you can't able to access it, and that increases your isolation and often desperation, because you think you're trapped in this situation. There's no way of making it easier or better. But to see some of the conditions disabled people are living in is absolutely dreadful, on top of the financial insecurity that they're dealing with on top of that as well.
Yeah. Well, of course.
No, I mean it's sorry, carry on, Damo.
No problem. I was just going to come back to the point that was made about the government and their attitude towards disabled people, and I think it's exemplified by no one better than the DWP's own minister, Therese Coffey, who claims that the uplift for legacy benefit payments cannot be applied because that system cannot cope with adding extra money to it, and that disabled people should move to universal credit where possible. And not only is this untrue, because I mean they can give you a Christmas bonus of £10 at Christmas time, and they can put that in, or the cold weather payments, for example, they can also be put in exactly the same way. It's a dishonest line to take, quite frankly, but also switching to universal credit could leave disabled claimants substantially worse off, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, Theresa Coffey, when she said that, no, the computer system can give the £20 uplift to universal credit, to legacy benefits, without a shadow of a doubt. As you said, they can give £10 Christmas bonus and cold weather payments. So that's complete and utter, lies, which often come out from Theresa Coffey, to be honest with you. And I think, it needs to be stated that throughout Europe, the UK has the least generous benefit system. When you compare it to, across the EU, and I think that's really important to stress. But I think if you put the question back to Jen, and then I'll feed some more back in. My train of thoughts disappeared a little bit.
Yeah, good to see you back there, Jennifer. I know you had to nip off quickly then. The question I just asked was basically that Therese Coffey has claimed that the uplift for legacy benefit claimants can't be applied, apparently, because their system can't cope with adding extra money to that older system. And of course,
seriously,
where is it?
Whatever. When it's, for example, cold weather payments, they managed to put that to everybody. That's a new sum of money that has to go to all legacy claimants falling in certain criteria. They managed to put that on. If there is the payment, for example, at Christmas, that's a different additional sum of money, isn't it? Where they give everybody an extra £10 towards their Christmas. They managed to put that on, don't they? I mean, and for goodness sake, there's all the different elements to universal credit that they managed to juggle around the place, don't they? So I don't believe for a second, with all the different computer programming and everything that they've got in place for these systems, that they're not able to do these things. And one thing's for damn sure, when they want to take money off people, they're certainly very capable of doing that, aren't they?
Yes.
So I don't think I'm going to believe, or a lot of us are going to believe for a moment, that they're not capable of putting some money on. One of my biggest gripes with this entire situation is that there could be another lone parent with a disabled child, just like me, with exactly the same disabilities as me, who's already been moved on to universal credit, right? That person is getting the uplift. We're in exactly the same situation. We might even live in the same city, yeah? But this person's getting the uplift, and this person, me in this theoretical case, isn't. But this is what's actually happening the country over. And the thing is, Damo, that in Sheffield, there's more people on legacy benefits than there are on universal credit. So there's, as of October last year, and this is ONS figures, there's around 22,000 on universal credit, but there's around 24,000 on legacy benefits. Now that's just in one city. So if we look at that picture all over the country, and as Paula has said earlier, it's 2.5 million people at least on the legacy claimants.
Yeah.
Why is no one talking about it? I mean, we've been talking about the 3.5 million unemployed people and how appallingly they've been treated, and quite rightly so, quite rightly so. But 2.5 million legacy claimants, and hardly a whisper. And it was really good actually to see Martin Lewis pointed this out on the Andrew Marr show.
Yeah.
About a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. Martin Lewis pointed this out, that in the responses to the budget and all the headlines on all the papers, and there was nothing on any, that this huge chunk of society, very needy people with a lot of escalating costs due to the pandemic and due to the fact that we have our various disabilities, have been completely pushed to one side. It's very, very clear that Rishi Sunak and his government are only willing to support people who they think have got the potential to work. If they think you haven't got the potential to work, then you're not going to get any additional support. And as Paula and so many others have said, it makes us feel that they're basically creating this narrative that we're expendable. And when you look at that, along with the aforementioned DNRs that have been placed on people, and the speeches that we as disabled people are shielding at home about to listen to, saying doctors coming on TV or going on their Twitters or anything, and they're saying, you know, we're getting to the point where we might have to actually decide who gets oxygen and who doesn't. Yeah. It's eugenics. It's eugenics. It's eugenics. That's the word for it. And that's the word for not supporting disabled people, people on legacy benefits, with this extra £20 uplift.
It is.
Everybody needs to be talking about this.
It's establishing a second-class citizenry, essentially, consisting of the disabled. Paula, you want to come back in?
Yeah, going back to Jen's comment on eugenics, and I can give an example of that. Our neighbour this side of us, he passed away from coronavirus on the 19th of April last year, and he had multiple underlying health conditions. And when he was admitted to our local hospital, and I'm not going to name them because there's been quite a few examples of it, he wasn't given oxygen in the last 2 days of his life, or a ventilator. He was left to struggle to breathe and left to die, because as a disabled person he was expendable. But what the coronavirus bill, and there's been very little talk about that, and I think we need to because that has impacted on disabled people during the pandemic. What the government did just before lockdown last year was give the doctors extraordinary powers to decide who lives and who dies, because they knew that there were going to be an awful lot of people who were going to die. And Boris Johnson actually said at the start of the pandemic, he said, we're going to lose loved ones before their time, And the problem with that is they've made dreadful decisions that they could have prevented an awful lot of deaths, and they chose not to because they didn't really care about things like that. But yeah, we have seen rationing of treatment with ventilators. If you're over the age of 65, chances are you weren't going to get a ventilator. And one of our neighbours down here at the end in the row here, she passed away from coronavirus in January of this year, and she was 63. Yeah. And she was in a very similar situation to the neighbour the other side, kind of over 60, you were expendable, and she had underlying health conditions. But also you've seen thousands and thousands of disabled people have DNRs, do not resuscitate, placed on their records without their consent and without family consent. And that smacks of the Liverpool pathway from years ago, because this has sneakily come back in over time. But during the pandemic, they have ramped it up. And you have seen, you know, especially people with a learning disability, if you're in the 18 to 34 age group, you're 30 times more likely to die of coronavirus, and that's the Office of National Statistics figures, than that of a non-disabled person of the same age. And you know, 6 out of 10 coronavirus deaths have been that of disabled people. It's had a dreadful impact. But the coronavirus bill has been another way for the government to violate our human rights even further by deny the healthcare support we've needed, and change the criteria for healthcare support, put DNR, like we're expendable, we don't matter, we haven't got the right to live, so let's put a DNR on your records, and causing dreadful distress, and also denying the treatment and leaving us isolated. It's been very difficult for disabled people to get access to consultants. When the pandemic started, I couldn't get access to my GP. The GP in the whole year I've been shielding has not once contacted me, and I know they're really busy and everything, has not once contacted me to see if I needed anything. I had to email rheumatology 4 times to see what I should be doing, because I was just cast adrift. And obviously then losing my mental health support, and I had other family members die on top of that. And what happened to me back in August caused, you know, I needed that support more than ever, and it was just taken from me. And we've had thousands of people's stories of their support just being taken away, because, you know, and also I think it's really important to stress that you're seeing work as a health outcome banded around in the NHS an awful lot now. And you know, treatment, like I say, rationed, as Jen pointed out a week ago, 6 physio sessions when you need more than that. Or, you know, you get 8 pain clinic sessions and they talk about depression and you're not trying hard enough and it's all, you know, it's all your fault and everything. And often the doctors will say, oh, what do you do? And their attitude changing when you're not working as well. My partner had that in A&E only a week ago, and the attitude of the doctor when he said he wasn't working was absolutely dreadful, I've got to say, and it caused further distress when he needed support from them.
Jen?
To bring this back round to the legacy benefits and the uplift, and the reasons that we are pushing for it and asking for your support, for everybody who's watching to support, to take this motion that we've got on the DPAC website to your CLPs, your branches, your trade union meetings. We've got to look at the effect of not supporting some of the most vulnerable or most poorly people in our society, and the pressures on various services. It makes good sense to support people, because that can potentially then reduce the stress on carers, reduce pressure on NHS services, reduce the pressure on already overwhelmed to bursting mental health services, reduce the pressure on children's services, because let's not forget, when there's children involved and somebody has a crisis or has to go into hospital, has a mental health crisis, then social services and multi-agency support team all have to get involved. Also, when we're spending our money, we're not putting it into tax havens in some faraway island somewhere. We're putting it back into the local economy. We're spending it in our supermarket. We're paying our care workers, or we're spending it in the local travel authority, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It makes good economic sense for the NHS, the police, the social services, everybody, and for us to be supported to live independently and to have access to things that we need, we should have a right to, in order that we can be part of the communities that we live in. So please do support this motion.
Yeah, for those of us in trades unions and Labour, DPAC have put together that motion that Jen's just speaking about, with calling for the uplift of legacy benefits. We will, of course, attach a link to that for this video, and it's on the DPAC website for anybody that wants to catch it. As a final question, something that especially hasn't helped the fight that disabled people have found themselves in to get a fair deal has been press coverage when it does happen to disabled people, because it's been overwhelmingly negative. Particularly those for those suffering from so-called hidden illnesses, portrayed for years during the austerity years of the Conservative government as shirkers or skivers, much of it in the right-wing media. We've seen some of it in the left-leaning media as well. One of our left-wing associated media outlets platformed somebody with a track record of pro-eugenics this week, which has caused considerable upset to many disabled people. I'm not going to go into more detail on that because I don't believe such views should be normalized in public discussion, as much as people complain about not platforming or to not no platform people, I should say. But certain views are simply so abhorrent they shouldn't be normalized by being platformed. They're not normal views to have. But how harmful has the media overall been to attempts to improve social justice for disabled people? Paula.
I think if you go back to the beginning of austerity and when Ian Duncan Smith was Secretary of State for the DWP then, when they had the DWP Social Security Advisory Committee, and you know, he had his dreadful shopper scrounger posters to put on lampposts and everything else like that, and you started seeing, you know, 2.2 million people were on the sick, and you know, benefit fraud is sky high. And I think, you know, and his argument was there wasn't the funding available to give the you know, what the accurate precision was. Well, the accurate thing is that benefit fraud is at 1%. You know, that's a common problem in issue in society with that. The tests are really, really rigorous. But it should be noted that many of the right-wing media, the editors and owners of these papers, are friends of the Conservative government. You know, Channel 5, you know, the chair of Channel 5 is friends with George Osborne, and then you've got the chair of the BBC, you know, it's also friends with George Osborne. It's been incredibly difficult to get stories out into the mainstream media of what disabled people are going, and a constant battle for the narrative. But if you look over our history and why the history, there's always been, you talk about eugenics and everything, there's always been this narrative. If you look at Nazi Germany, for example, when they began their propaganda campaign with useless eaters and shirkers and scroungers and work shy, that's very much the language that the government have been using throughout the austerity agenda. There's frightening repetitions of history through that. And of course, you know, what we've seen, you know, with the recent media outlet is it's, you know, there wasn't the other narrative given during that debate, which caused horrendous upset to disabled people and caused dreadful distress. And we need to challenge platforms, progressive platforms that put people like that on to say, you know, this is completely and utterly wrong. But as they said in the TUC Disabled Workers Conference this week, we're seeing a frightening increasing shadow of eugenics creeping in society. But what the media has done is normalise the increasing hostility towards disabled people, and hate crime has more than doubled since 2010 as a result of the appalling stories in the media that have seen dreadful you know, stories of disabled people being attacked in the street, you know, frightened to go out because, you know, they've been verbally attacked, they've been physically attacked. I mean, we had a story in my local station where a disabled person in a wheelchair was pushed onto the tracks in his wheelchair and left to die. And if it wasn't for a platform member of staff who risked his life to get the person off the tracks, he would have died. You know, we've got thousands of stories of hate crime incidents because of the right-wing media. And I remember a protest that we were on for access to work, which is, you know, a hugely valuable, important pot of money for disabled people to have adaptations in the workplace. And the government were changing the criteria and trying to put cuts to access to work. Channel 5 turned up, calling us all kinds of names and everything. We had to chase the journalist away from the protest. And it's caused huge mistrust of the media because of stories like that. But you know, there have been many independent journalists and everything who've done great work in highlighting the issues we've been campaigning around and trying to get out to the wider arena. And I want to thank, Disability News Service has been absolutely brilliant, and John Pring, he's been constant with the stories that he's been trying to raise and the work that he's doing. And obviously, being a disabled person himself, he knows what it's like to be at the sharp end as well. The Canary and Steve Topple and many others, and people like yourselves, and platforms like this are hugely important. But we've still got a lot more work to do with them, to get our stories out into the wider media, because we're being silenced every which way, and especially when you've got campaign contributors who own a great many of our media outlets. It's harder for they're buying into the government rhetoric because they believe an awful lot of that. Go on, Jen, you want to add to that?
Yeah. Final point from Jen.
So the effect on the media, the effect of the media onto us as the disabled community is stark. And I think you only have to listen to somebody who is disabled, whether they are working or not working actually, to find out how they feel as a result of the way that the press angle certain things generally in this country. And I'll take you back to the Dump Metro DWP Lies campaign that we had a couple of years ago with DPAC. And this is where civil servants authored advertorials that were made to look like articles, paid for by public money, were done in a very hush-hush way behind closed doors and presented in the Metro, Daily Mail, newspapers and their websites. £250,000 of public money. Aren't civil servants supposed to be politically neutral? When these sorts of things are happening, we have got to step back and take a look at what are the alternatives. The alternatives are independent media, like Socialist Telly, like Black Owl Media, like the Canary. I mean, Labour Grassroots and Socialist Telly actually are the only two independent medias other than Sheffield Live TV, who have covered this issue. They're the only ones who've given a platform specifically to highlight this issue of the £20 uplift and legacy benefits. And we're really, really grateful for your support with that, and very thankful for the solidarity, and hope that it does make a difference, not just to us as individuals, coming here and talking about our own experiences, but to all of us as a disabled community. That's why we're taking the time to do these things, and I know that's why you're taking the time to do these things, because it's never about improving something for one person in one household. Let's be honest, anyone can do that. Anyone can improve something for one person in one household. We're talking about 2.5 million people, many of whom have had to get by on £74 a week. For goodness sake, for goodness sake. We deserve better, and that better that we deserve is to be treated as well as those on universal credit, even though, and this is with the caveat, that we fully appreciate and understand that universal credit is far from sufficient, because we've been campaigning against universal credit as an organisation for over a decade.
Yeah. Jen, Paula, thank you so much for your time tonight. If you'd like to follow the campaign, do follow DPAC on Twitter at DIS_PPL_protest. And you can also follow Paula on Twitter. Her handle is at PaulaPeters2. So please give her a follow as well. The quote, "A nation's greatness is measured by how it treats its weakest members," is often attributed to Gandhi. Whoever said it, they're absolutely right. What the hell is so great about Great Britain in the context that you've heard here tonight? If we want to be considered a great anything, we have to do better by our poorest, by our most vulnerable, and do more than just say we will. We need to do it collectively. Raise these issues with your local government, with your MP. Support and follow DPAC. And keep supporting your left-wing alternative media as well, as Paula and Jen have both mentioned today, who will keep on raising and supporting the fight for this issue.